Harley, how are you?
I'm doing great, Sean. How are you?
Well, I'm good too, and I'm really glad to have you back on the line. I mean, so much has changed geopolitically and economically since the last time we spoke. And you and I exchanged emails just briefly about a week ago, Harley, and you said what we should do on this call is talk about the bankster oligarchs. And you ask a very important question: will American patriots rise to bring them down? Harley, we see derivatives collapsing. We see JP Morgan has lost more than $8 billion in value over just the past couple of trading days. The house of cards is coming down, and the question is, are the bankster oligarchs ripe for a fall?
They definitely are. They've been ripe for a fall for a while, but what's happened, what's changed, is that other nations are beginning to reject the Washington-London consensus. And there's even fighting going on within Washington and London. The most important thing is that, as you've been pointing out for a long time, there's a fraud in the way people talk about economics. The extent to which people are focused on money, monetary policy, leaves them blinded to the fact that there has to be something backing up money. And what we've seen is under the Federal Reserve System in our country, the European Central Bank, we see private banks have taken over the process of credit policy. And they care not for the population or whether there's an improved standard of living or even a possibility for that. They're concerned with their day-to-day positions and how to make money trading. And what's happened is there's such a divergence now between the financial system and the real economy that you can't even sustain the financial system much longer. And in Europe, there's a tremendous crisis with the banking system. We don't see it as much here, but you mentioned JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, Wells Fargo, Bank of America. They're all sitting there with unsustainable levels of bad assets. It should have been written off after 2008 and never was. And the only question is, will these banks fall, leading to a total implosion of the financial system and chaos, or will there be an intervention to put it through an orderly bankruptcy? In any case, the power of the oligarchy is dramatically weakened, and we see that with Obama. Obama is looking for any diversion he can find to avoid a discussion of the economy.
Well, Harley, to that end, I want to ask you a little bit about precious metals, and I want to ask you a little bit about the debt of the banks. In an odd twist, you're going to love this, a Canadian bullion dealer is now offering to pay interest on gold and silver, and they're willing to pay up to 4.5% interest, but here's the hook. You have to be willing to let them hang on to your physical gold for at least 3 years. What I find really ironic about that, Harley, is that we know at the heart of the corruption of these big international banks and the big international bullion banks is the fact that there is no more physical on deposit. Their fiat system is literally breaking down to the point where, as one bank like Deutsche Bank and the derivatives begin to collapse, the systemic risk cannot be overstated. One bank's problems is all of the bank's problems. And I just wanted your opinion on that. Don't you find it ironic that now there's a bank in Canada saying, hey, give us your physical gold, trust us, you can trust us, and we'll pay you 4.5% interest, and we'll hold your physical. Would you dare do that, Harley? You'd have to be insane to entrust your physical gold to these banks.
There's a grab going on for anything that's real by the banks and by their networks. And the element here of fraud is what you have to look at. They've been pumping the system with dollars, with quantitative easing, with bailouts. They tried to go with bail-ins, and you and I had discussed this last time. They can't do the bail-in in Europe because everyone knows that you're not going to be able to save the banks by stealing the deposits, but you might end up with the bankers lynched if they actually steal the deposits. They're looking for any source of money they can grab, and I don't just mean paper money, but properties. You know, hedge funds are buying foreclosed properties, which is what has increased to some extent, an uptick in the home markets. There's a short-term increase in prices on copper and other metals, but that's largely because the supply had gotten so low. So what when we talk about a divergence between the financial system and the real economy, the question is, how do you keep the smoke and mirrors going so that the suckers will do something like turn over their gold or pay negative interest rates, pay money to banks for the privilege of giving them your deposits, which will be eaten up if there's a bail-in. So the bankers are betting that the people will be stupid and go along with these things, and basically with the threat that if you don't have banking stability, you lose everything. So you've got to make sure the banks survive. And what people have to realize is that the banks are pretty much gone. They are bankrupt. The pension funds are bankrupt. They can't be, you can talk about Social Security all you want. The pension funds are sitting there with huge volumes of derivatives, which they figure they can sell if they need to get some liquid cash. But there's no market for these things. The interbank market in Europe is completely frozen. So, I'm not surprised that there are banks that are trying to get their hands on whatever assets you have. Gold is an obvious one.
Yeah.
That's right. You'd be crazy to go along with it.
Yeah, and the other thing is, Harley, you mentioned that they're trying to get their hands on your cash. I mean, they're going to gut the pensions, and they're literally going to try to steal people's bank accounts through negative interest rates. Now, it's amazing enough that they would even introduce the idea of negative interest rates, because in my mind, Harley, that alone should create exactly what they don't want, which is a run on the banks, because people should then just take their cash out. But of course, now they're trying to ban cash so that people can't get their cash out, Harley.
But the other thing that they're doing is they're running all these test cases. Like Cyprus was a test case on the bail-ins, and there wasn't a huge reaction. There was a reaction last December when Italy put 4 banks through bail-ins, and 10,000 depositors lost everything. So that reaction forced the European Union to back down on going with the bail-in. They're still debating how to do it. Janet Yellen and others, the fact that they're talking about negative interest rates, that they've gone to negative interest rates in Switzerland where people are willing to pay to keep their money, but Japan has negative interest rates. The fact that they're talking about it is they're trying to gauge what the reaction will be. And most people are so terrified of their financial future, financial insecurity, that they don't speak out. They don't say anything about these things. And so, in a sense, the test case is telling them, go ahead and try whatever you want, that people will not react. And in the meantime, we've got this diversion called the presidential campaign, where there's absolutely no discussion about this real problem of the bankruptcy of the financial system.
Yeah, you're right. We're going to talk about that presidential campaign, too. I want to ask you about Hillary Clinton, a perpetual, habitual liar. But before we do that, I want to play this soundbite for you from Andy Hoffman. Because those of us who are paying attention, Harley, are waking up and are reacting in absolute horror. In fact, listen to this.
He predicts 4.5% negative rates in Europe, 3.5% in Japan, 2.5% in the UK, and 1.5% in the United States. And my God, they are actually planning to hoard everyone into the banks and then take their money.
That's from my recent interview with Andy Hoffman. And that's what people need to understand. Negative interest rates is a scheme to steal what is left of the people's wealth.
Well, when they announced the attempt to sell bail-in bonds as a way to raise regulatory capital in Europe, initially people said, well, what's the deal here? We get 2 or 3% interest when there's no interest rates at all. Yeah, why not do it? And they didn't read the fine print, which basically said these bonds are unsecured debt. In other words, the banks can renege on them and keep the money. Now, that was parallel to the adoption of bail-in, where they could start seizing deposits. And this is in Dodd-Frank Section 2. It's in the U.S. law that bail-in rather than bailout would be the policy. But in the chatter that goes on behind the scenes, everyone acknowledges that even if they do steal deposits, it's not enough to cover what they need. Most recently, the new chairman of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve spilled the beans. He said, look, we're going to have bailouts because the alternative is letting the system collapse. So they don't believe that these schemes will work, but they'll go up to the edge with them, and they will go as far as they can until there's a reaction. And that's why I brought up this point, that unless the American people do wake up and do act, and I don't just mean act for personal survival by pulling your money out of the bank. I mean, if you pull your cash out of the bank and stick it in a mattress, you have no guarantee that that money is going to be worth anything in 60 days. So, we need a change in policy. And that's where the change has to take place.
Yeah. Let's turn our attention now to these.
Sean, let me just mention one other point here.
Okay.
If you look at what we rely on in the United States, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, they're currently insuring $6.7 trillion in deposits.
They have less than 1% on hand to cover the banking run.
They have $60 billion. And they have a $500 billion credit line at the Treasury. So $565 billion backing up $6.7 trillion. There's no way they can guarantee the deposits they're supposed to guarantee. And if they start letting the banks steal them, which is the other aspect, what you're looking at is a chain reaction collapse that will wipe everyone out.
Well, Harley, that is why we've been telling people for years now, physical precious metals, gold and silver, will offer some protection, some safe harbor from the banking criminals that seek to steal what little you have left. And they really are criminals. And, turning our attention back to these presidential politics, it astounds me that the name Hillary Clinton can still be mentioned by the mainstream mockingbird media with a straight face when she is such a perpetual criminal and a habitual liar. This woman received $675,000 for three private speeches at Goldman Sachs. She's the ultimate banking insider in terms of politicians. She's the ultimate oligarch. And here you have people in this country actually willing to vote for her, Harley. How do you even explain that? And then how do you explain the Trump phenomenon?
Well, the Trump phenomenon is easy. People are happy to see someone show contempt for the establishment. It doesn't even matter what Trump says he's going to do because he hasn't really outlined a lot of plans other than the wall. It's the contempt for the system, the contempt for the establishment. Now, Hillary is the establishment. And the problem is that Bernie Sanders doesn't really represent an alternative to her. And I'll tell you the real problem there. The last debate, he was going head over heels to embrace Obama. They were arguing about who's closer to Obama. Now, it's really not about the black vote. It's about the fact that they're afraid to say the obvious, which is Obama is a criminal who should have been run out of office through impeachment. I mean, LaRouche has been calling for this going back to a webcast in April 2009, where he identified Obama as a pathological narcissist and a satanic figure. And in spite of the massive evidence that that's true, no one has had the guts to take on Obama. And I mean, really take him on. So the result is we have Hillary and Sanders who, Bernie, with all the talk he says against Wall Street, he's embracing Wall Street's president. On the Republican side, the establishment figures are laughable. You look at what happened to Jeb Bush as a perfect example.
Right.
And,
talk about no support.
Yeah, well, I thought what was really interesting is that Trump went on the offensive in South Carolina against George W. Bush. And all the pundits said, oh, this will destroy him because of all the veterans in South Carolina. But he brought up an important point. Even veterans who may have supported the idea of a strong president in war recognize that the Iraq War was a disaster, a continuing disaster, because that's where ISIS came from. And the idea that attacking Bush would hurt Trump in South Carolina proved that these pundits haven't learned a damn thing from what's going on both with the presidential campaign and in the real world. Now, the other thing that Trump brought up, which was worth really talking about, is he brought up that it was not Iraq that had anything to do with 9/11, but the Saudis. And the Saudis continue to be the dominant factor in the continued terrorist assault in the Middle East. And yet the United States is still in a total embrace with Saudi Arabia to the extent that Obama is supporting ISIS and al-Qaeda. So Trump went further than anyone else has gone. Now he's got to go all the way and say, look, this is Obama's policy. It wasn't just Bush's policy.
Right. Well, that's right. And, Trump is saying things that nobody else has been saying in politics. And Cruz and Rubio have both been exposed by Trump's, frankly, his honesty, his discourse, his ability to speak off the cuff, his ability to speak without talking points in a teleprompter in a way that is being received by the general public at large as at least being organic. At least he's being honest, whereas Rubio and Cruz have that same processed speech pattern that Hillary has.
And you mentioned Hillary's connection to Goldman Sachs, and it's much bigger than the $675,000 in speaking fees because the banks have been contributing a large amount of money to the Clinton Foundation. But Ted Cruz sleeps every night with the enemy. His wife was an executive at Goldman Sachs who took a leave of absence.
That's right, and he didn't even disclose that. I think when he filed his paperwork to run, he put her down as a baker instead of a banker.
Well, he also neglected to mention $1.2 million loan for his Senate campaign in 2012, I guess it was, when he said that he was taking all the money from his savings account to run for Senate. He actually was given a $1.2 million loan, which he did not disclose, from Goldman Sachs. So, to go back to the Trump question, the bigger issue here is that when we talk about an uprising in the United States, it can't be that people just wait for some person to ride in on a white horse and take on Wall Street, take on the oligarchy. It's got to be an organic mobilization of the American people, and it needs specific programs. And one of the things that you and I have discussed for several years now is that the best way to bring down the bankers right now would be to start with Glass-Steagall. So you take away the depository institution's ability to seize deposits to back up worthless debt. The separation of commercial banks from investment banks would expose the investment banks as running Ponzi schemes. It would also force most of the commercial banks into a bankruptcy reorganization. Then the question is, where would credit come from to get the economy jump-started? And it could not come from the Federal Reserve because the Federal Reserve is essentially an agency of those private banks. So we're at a point now where we can seriously talk about moving away from a Federal Reserve, fractional reserve looting system to actually a system of credit based on production, on physical wealth, real economy. And that's what should be discussed here, not just that Wall Street is bankrupt and Wall Street's no damn good and that they're collapsing. We need an alternative.
And which candidate, Harley, offers us the best shot at getting that? Certainly not Hillary Clinton.
Well, at this point, I would say none of them have indicated that they're in any way thinking in the right direction.
Although I do think Trump just mentioned that the Fed should be audited, which was refreshing. You're not going to hear that from Hillary Clinton.
No, but I think, this is where we have to go beyond the half-a-loaf approach.
Yeah.
We need the whole loaf of bread. The Fed shouldn't be audited. It should be shut down. We
Right.
know it's a criminal institution. And I'd like to see Trump go further on these things. And as you know, LaRouche is putting forward this idea that we can move outside of the transatlantic financial system now based on the potential for development that's coming out of all places, China and Russia. And this brings us to the second major point here, which is that Obama has been exposed as a weak phony by what Putin did to take on terrorism in Syria.
Right.
And now we see the administration split between the faction that includes a section of the military which is saying, look, the Russians are actually fighting the terrorists. We should be working with them. And that's what was behind the Kerry-Lavrov agreement to try to get a ceasefire. Because the fact of the matter is that sooner or later the Russians are going to break the back of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Well, we did nothing except build them up. And so you have another faction in the administration, which is typified by Brennan and the CIA, which is trying to sabotage the ceasefire to protect the terrorists that they've armed and trained. So this gives us a perfect opportunity to bring Obama up on charges of violation of the Constitution, criminal charges. It gives us the opportunity to really crack the back of this City of London, Wall Street empire, which, as we were talking about financially, is terribly weakened, and strategically is trying to destroy the potential for an alternative by putting us on a course toward war with Russia and China.
Let me ask you something, Harley. There seems to be some good guys in the Pentagon that stand directly opposed to Obama. I think that's pretty much what you were just saying. And there seems to be a move back to common sense and constitutionality and rule of law in this presidential campaign with a lot of the things Trump is saying. There's no way a guy as smart as Trump would have decided sort of willy-nilly, spur of the moment, to risk everything, including his life, to run against criminal crime families like the Clinton and Bush crime families. We've seen Jeb Bush be defeated badly, and I personally think that what the establishment wanted is they wanted a Clinton-Bush race in 2016.
Yeah, sure.
They didn't get Bush because of Trump, largely, and because Jeb Bush was a terrible candidate. But what I'm driving at is, I think it's a big sea change. It's certainly monumental. What's your take? Am I on the right track?
Well, there's a lot going on behind the scenes that we usually don't see. One of those things was pointed out by the Seymour Hersh article, that there are people in the U.S. military who realize our ground forces and our military capabilities being destroyed by this permanent warfare. That's what always brings down imperial forces. When you're strung out all over the world, where you're using factions and tribes and sects as your various kind of proxies, it doesn't work. And there are people in the military. General Dempsey, the former Joint Chiefs of Staff chairman, understood this. Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, the former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, who's speaking out all over the world against the Obama policy, the Bush and Obama policy. There are people in the military who are ready to move on and recognize that Russia is not the Russia of Bolsheviks and communists, but that Russia does have a national interest in fighting against terrorism and against drug proliferation. Now, you have on the other side the utopians who really are planning how could they use a new generation of nuclear weapons to knock out Russia and China as potential rivals. This goes back to the Project for a New American Century, which was the Wolfowitz, Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney gang, the Robert Kagan gang, who basically said, we'd better take on Russia and China in the 21st century or we'll lose out. Now, you have the same thinking on the liberal imperialists, the Susan Rice, Samantha Powers, who control Obama. And a key nexus point there, and this is important, is Hillary Clinton, because she's the one who brought Victoria Nuland, who's part of this PNAC crowd, brought Nuland in to run the coup in Ukraine.
That's right.
So this crowd is dedicated to destroying any potential opposition to the London Wall Street oligarchy. Now, what's important is that one of the countries that's key in this, that's starting to break from it, is Germany, because the German industrialists know they need Russia and China, and they know that the EU, the European Union, was created to prevent a German turn toward Eurasia. Now, the question you really have to ask yourself is, should we be afraid of Russia and China as economic competitors? Well, the only reason we would be afraid of them is if we're destroying our own economy. If we unleash the potential of the American financial or American economic system, as LaRouche discusses it, physical economy, we'll be fine. We'll do great, as Trump would say. If we instead penalize real production and penalize investments that go into physical economy to keep the Ponzi scheme going, then we should be afraid of these other countries because they are not going to destroy themselves for the sake of London and Wall Street. And so that's the shift that's occurring. And you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to see that Bush and Obama are the product of the same system, and that so is Hillary Clinton. Now, the potential for a break, rather than focusing on Trump per se, is we need to just see the American people speaking out against this oligarchy and speaking out in whatever way possible. And I will say one final point on that, Sean. I've seen in the last few years a tremendous growth in the kind of work that you're doing and other bloggers and websites The fact is that you can't contain anymore a patriotic impulse because the people who are tuning into you already know they're being lied to in the media and they're looking for truth. They're seeking it on their own. And that's why what LaRouche keeps emphasizing, what we do with LaRouche PAC, is put forward alternative policies. So we're not just stuck talking about what's bad and what's collapsing, but we're giving people an understanding of where we can go in the future.
Well, you are. And again, you mentioned not destroying our own economy. You know, Trump would say the economy can be good again here in this country if we can get out from under the oligarchs which seek to destroy it. But I do wonder about that $19 trillion in debt. Harley, I'm not sure if even we had Ron Paul in office at this point that things could be turned around when we're 19.5 trillion in debt. What's your take on that?
Well, look, we have a growing national debt, but we also have a huge corporate debt, private sector debt. The American people are saddled with huge debts, whether it's student debt or credit card debt. We're in a debtor economy. Now, you can do one of two things. One of the leading economists in Europe, William White, is saying we need a Jubilee year. We need to write down a lot of this debt, especially the bank debt. Now, with government debt, because that's treasury bonds and basically the good name of the United States, what we have to do with that is start producing again. The way to reduce debt is to make sure that whatever credit you're issuing is going to something that will produce more wealth than the utterance of credit implies. In other words, with productivity gains, with science and technology, we know this from the past. We know this from the post-World War II economy. The United States grew because we modernized the steel industry. We modernized the auto industry, the aerospace sector. With NASA, we produced as a spin-off the computer industry. These things increase the wealth, as a study at the time on what NASA did, $10 to $14 in private sector profit for every dollar that was spent by the government. Now, that's where government seed capital formation actually works, when it's credit that goes into physical economy, into infrastructure, into real job creation, not these phony part-time, temporary, low-wage jobs that Obama is so enamored with. So the way you deal with debt, as Alexander Hamilton said, is you never take on a debt without the means to extinguish it. It'll take a while to pay down the 19 trillion, but we could do it. Instead, we're borrowing more and more money to pay the debt and to service the debt. And that will never work. That's the sure prescription for bankruptcy.
Yeah, that's right. And it is that, I think, 6% mandate built into the Federal Reserve System, the privately owned banking oligarchical system in which the people have to pay interest on every dollar printed into existence by the Rothschild Rockefeller criminal printing press.
And that's the Federal Reserve System. That's the way it's set up.
Oh, absolutely. The central banks around the world are set up that way.
If you get rid of that, then you're immediately going to start lowering the debt. And, rather than cutting money for job training for poor people or drug rehabilitation and mental health, we should be cutting the debt that's going to these usurers. That's the way you solve the problem.
Yeah. Usury is the problem, and it is the weapon by which these bankers are attempting to enslave, and have effectively enslaved humanity. And guys, if you're not familiar with LaRouchePAC.com, please go there, because the type of articles you're going to get, like this one, let me read just a bit from this one. Putin drives ahead with Syria peace initiative, urgent to cast aside Obama and the British. Russian President Vladimir Putin is driving ahead this week on the new Syria ceasefire initiative in its full implications to back down the warmongers. Elements in this process over the February 22nd to 23rd period are serving to tie down Obama and his London controllers with more and more constraints. You're not going to find that type of reporting, guys, at CNBC, at Fox News, at CNN, but you'll get it from LaRouche PAC because they're honest people and they're really, really trying to save our nation from annihilation. And Harley, it's always my great honor to be able to speak with you. Can you tell people how they can learn more or get involved?
Sure. The first place to go is LaRouchePAC.com. And, as I've done several times on this program, if people want to contact me, I've maintained some correspondence with a number of your subscribers, Sean. That you can contact me at harleysch@gmail.com. So it's HARLEYSCH@gmail.com. And it may take me a few days to get back to you, but I do appreciate the fact that you have people who are seeking truth, and more and more of them are saying, well, what do we do to win this fight? And that's the kind of thinking we need. You just made an important point about how the oligarchy has made the American people submissive. And that's where they're testing the reaction to negative interest rates, testing the reaction to Obamacare and things of this sort. And we've seen impotence from the Republicans who say they oppose it, but then they capitulate. We actually need something that goes outside of the system, that reconstitutes the institution of the presidency as an agency that is for the American people, not for the banksters. And so if people want to get involved with that, go to LaRouchePAC.com, send me an email, and I'm happy to work with people.
Always cool, Harley. I've always thought that's really neat that you're willing to correspond with people directly. And guys, it's an opportunity to get involved. I mean, I think we're seeing a sea change with some of the things Trump is saying, and I do think he stands in stark opposition to the Bush-Clinton crime families. Say what you want about Donald Trump, but he's a whole lot better than Hillary Clinton, Jeb Bush.
Well, and let's just say this, he scared the hell out of the establishment.